clothing.
Are we going to allow anything on Matthew
It's
first?
live.
It's live. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah.
Well done, Ben.
Sorry. Well, I did say you ready, and you were like, "Yep," and then it was silent, and then you went, "Oh, what about this? What about that?" I was like, "No, shh."
Yeah.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to this amazing host, Ben Ikra. Assalamu alaikum. So, who's going to introduce how we're going to do things today?
So I'll just start us off, inshallah. So generally for the gospel, there we go, out of focus. There we go. There we are. Right. So generally for the Gospel of Luke, we have two early papyri, and they're actually quite substantial. For me, one of the earlier ones is P4. That's from the 3rd to the 4th century CE. It contains generally from Luke chapter 1, verse 58 until about Luke chapter 6, verse 16. And then we have P75, which traditionally dates between the 2nd to the early 4th century. So it's a lot of a longer range, and it can fall anywhere along that range. And I believe it contains Luke chapter 3, verse 18 to Luke chapter 24, verse 53. So it's actually a lot of the material. But the dating of it, again, as I mentioned, is very long. So because it's about a 2 centuries worth of possibilities for the dating, we generally don't tend to argue that it's from the 2nd century. I would mention here that previous to the last 4 years, scholars had said that Codex Vaticanus, which is one of the more reliable and most complete New Testament codices, that was descended from P75. Now they're saying it's not in terms of a parent and a child text, but rather siblings, that they're contemporaneous with each other. And if we work with that, then it means that the majority of Luke as we have it today will come from the 4th century onwards. And I'm going to pass it over to our good brother Hamza, who has had a lot to cry about over this week. I want to mention that Dr. Imran has been celebrating at Ijaz this week, as has brother Nazam. I'm just happy that my team played a role in helping make the Kings this season.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. All right, so we're doing the same with the Luke that we did with Matthew and with Mark. Yeah, like you've gone through the papyri, what they have. Again, it's the same point, though. It's kind of a moot point because what's prior to that and what was it before that, we don't know. So we have no originals. Everything's copies from copies, so we get that. All right. I started to read the Gospel of Luke, and I'll be honest with you. I had quite a few questions from the beginning, to be honest with you. The first question I would ask is, what would have possessed Luke to believe that he could write a biography of Jesus better than Mark and Matthew, where Mark was apparently a scribe of Peter and some Christians claim Matthew was. So first of all, what possessed him to do such a thing? And he says something really interesting. He says many people have done this already. Many, yeah? Which we would assume is more than 2. So why do we not have these Gospels around that Luke is referring to? This would just be my opening gambit from reading it. So we could continue to the birth narrative and how did he know what was happening at the birth of John the Baptist and where did this information come from and all of these things. But we are looking at it as an historical document. So what would a Christian response be to something like this? Because obviously you deal with Christians on a big time scale and you have nice debates. What do they say when you ask these kind of questions with regards to the authorship of Luke and what was he thinking?
Well, they say that Luke must have been a historian because the way he writes reflects a historian's method. He uses a historian's template for the format of his work, the way he phrases his words, the way he structures his use of multiple sources. So like beginning from, I think, Mark chapter 3, verse 31 to Mark chapter 4, he uses like the Gospel of Mark. Then he switches to Q for another couple of chapters. Then he switches back to Mark, then switches back to Q. And so scholars have long recognized that he mixes and matches sources. Now, you did mention something interesting. So I'm reading from my Nestle Allen text, he does say at the very start that many have undertaken the word there being poloi, but it's verse 3, Brother Hamza, where it gets particularly interesting. So in verse 3, he says that he wants to write something from the very first. Anothen is the word used, indicating that the ones who wrote before him did not start from the very first. So this may indicate to us he may not have had access to Matthew's work, even though Matthew's work would have been in circulation before his. He continues that his work is going to contain everything. The Greek word here is pasin. And then it's very peculiar the word he uses next. He uses the word akribos, which means carefully. So others have undertaken to write or construct a narrative, but the others did not account for everything from the very start, and they did not write it carefully, their use of the sources. And lastly, it mentions kataxis, which means that he wants to put them in a very orderly account. Now, if you read the Gospel according to Mark, Brother Hamza, it does not differ significantly with the order of things in the Gospel of Luke. So it just seems strange where this criticism is coming from. The Greek words tell us that whatever came before him was not up to Mark, as in the general pun use, not Mark the author. So I pray that answers the first part of your question. Brother Hamza, was that the only question you had?
Yeah, no, the main part for me that really raised my eyebrows, to be honest, was where it says many have done this.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the Christians, prior to Luke, there's only two Gospels, Matthew and Mark. So, because I have many people saying to me, where's the Injil? Where's the Injil? As a Muslim, as if everything's available. Yeah. Where's all these Gospels that were written by these many that Luke is referring to? What do the Christians respond to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brother Hamza, and I've not really seen any satisfactory answer from my Christian friends. This is why some scholars, I believe Barterman is one of them, think that the prologue of Luke's Gospel is 2nd century, so it wasn't necessarily written by the same author, but it was possibly written around the 2nd century, and around the 2nd century, you did actually have many Gospels, and Gospels that we know about only by name, and some we just know indirectly through commentaries of church fathers. So in terms of like these other accounts, it's possible there may be some proto-Luke or an early edition of Luke's Gospel, and the first 2 chapters of Luke may be added later. And Luke may have originally begun from chapter 3, but it's difficult to know ultimately.
But so potentially it's just another smoking gun with regards to fabrication.
Even Paul mentions other Gospels, and Gospels didn't necessarily mean in the beginning referring to some kind of ancient biography of Jesus that begins with Jesus' birth and then his ministry, and then finally ending with his demise and then ascension into heaven. That's how we understand.
That's what Luke implies. Luke implies that he's doing this kind of biography thing that many other people have done.
Well, brothers, may I offer a grenade for this lovely discussion? Quick question to Brother Nazam. Who is Luke said to be? What was his occupation before following Paul?
Traditionally, it's believed that he's a physician.
Do you know why they say that, Brother Nazam?
No.
So I'm going to read a quote from you from a work which existed between the year 50 and the year 70. It's written by Dioscorides, a very famous Roman physician. Sounds funny, yeah? Here is his first 4 lines to the introduction of his work on Greek medicine. He writes, although many reports have been made, not only in the past, but also recently about the production, effects, and testing of medicines, I nevertheless intend to instruct you, dear Ereos, so he's writing to a friend, about them. The decision to undertake such a thing is neither needless nor injudicious, for some of my predecessors have not completed their works, and others have written things down from hearsay. So what the scholars say of early Christianity is that the author of the gospel attributed to Luke basically took his template for his quote-unquote historical writing from a very popular literary work at that time, Dioscorides' work on medicine. The exact same words, anothen, akribos, poloi, many have undertaken, all of these words are word for word used almost in the exact same order as
Interesting.
Dioscorides' work. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. But it's clear if he did use this as a template, the very last line of what Dioscorides writes stands out. And others have written down most things from hearsay. And so that's why he, Dioscorides, is being careful because the others have not been. And as we begin to compare the stories, we'll begin to notice what exactly he was critiquing, I think.
Yeah, because what I find really interesting when you start to read the Gospel of Luke is that even though he's not a disciple or eyewitness, he's a Gentile, nothing to do with it, and he's taken from hearsay, he seems to contradict those who Christians claim were, like Mark, the scribe of Peter. So one example is when after, I always laugh when I say this, sorry, after feeding the 5,000, Jesus is asked for a sign to prove who he is. And according to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus says, no sign shall be given to this adulterous generation. Yeah. But when we come to Luke, it changes the story. So now there will be a sign, the sign of Jonah. So historically, did Jesus say these words or not? Because we have Mark, who's supposed to be a scribe of Peter, doesn't have these words. Yet we have Luke, who's taken from hearsay, because he clearly wasn't there. And now he's putting words in Jesus' mouth. How do we take this historically?
It's not necessarily Luke who's putting words into Jesus's mouth, but what most scholars think is that both Matthew and Luke had access to, in addition to Mark's gospel, Matthew and Luke also had access to another document, which was namely a collection of sayings of Jesus, which they referred to as Q, as the saying gospel Q. And the sign of Jonah comes from this saying gospel or Q saying. And the sign of Jonah had no reference to any 3 days or 3 nights or any time factor. So which is why in Luke there's no reference to 3 days and 3 nights, and which is why the sign of Jonah in Luke's gospel isn't about the time factor, but it's about the state in which Jonah was in the fish's belly.
But what is the sign of Jonah?
So yeah, this is a good question. So the sign of Jonah traditionally has been interpreted by both Jews, Christians, and Muslims is that Jonah survived death from the fishes.
3 days and 3 nights. Yeah. But who asked for the sign, and who was told they would be given a sign?
So this would be like the Pharisees and the scribes that come to Jesus. So
the Pharisees are asking for a sign. Jesus, according to the Gospel of Luke, says there'll be no sign but the sign of Jonah. Does Jesus fulfill this?
Well, it doesn't seem like it that he does, at least on the face value, because if he was crucified, as Luke says he was, and died, then it doesn't seem like Jesus was like Jonah in the whale's belly.
No, but even if he resurrected, according to Jesus, he should be appearing to the Pharisees,
which he never does in Luke's gospel.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, so a prophecy was made by Jesus. The only sign he'll give these people is this, and yet he doesn't give that sign. And then in Mark, there is no sign. Do you get me? So it's it's
odd.
Is there a sign? Is there not a sign? Do you get me? It appears there's no sign.
Yeah. It's probably because Luke is using like multiple sources, and the sources that he uses disagree with Luke's own theology. So he uses or interprets them differently to how they originally appear in the original context. So originally the sign of Jonah wasn't about death and resurrection, but it was about a live Jesus, a Jesus surviving. But Luke now uses it differently for his own purposes. And so Jesus is crucified in Luke instead of being alive like he is in this other document known as the Q saying.
Okay. No, because we're looking at historical context, not theology. And the idea that Jesus would say something and then not do it kind of makes you question, did Jesus say he'll do it in the first place? And then when you see the contradictory reports with regards to what Jesus said when he was asked for a sign, you start questioning the history of what was actually said at that point.
Well, there's been quite a few things that have undermined the fundamental reliability of the gospel to start with. I mean, the first thing was that Brother Ijaz gave us the sort of the timings of the early manuscripts that we have, and surprisingly, it's all 2nd to 4th century, very, very late. From the 4th century, you're talking about just a couple, maybe 100 or so years before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So really, we're talking quite late if you try to put it in the timeline. And then the whole idea that if we look at who Luke was meant to be. And he says that he's doing an investigation to try and lay out the facts. Now, if he's with Paul, as is alleged that he's with Paul and he's taking his information from Paul, and he would have met the disciples, this information would have been relayed directly from the individuals who were involved. But it's clear that he's using other sources, written sources that are later. And I think some of that will come up. He quotes from the Septuagint. He also sort of uses the Q source, as we mentioned, in between using a bit of Mark. Now, so he's really like somebody. It's like a student putting together an essay and trying to get all the facts together and then presenting it. This is actually what happened. The fascinating bit for me when Brother Nazam mentioned that actually maybe the beginning, that part of it was added later. So as soon as you said that, I went to look at chapter 3, and that actually you could take that as a beginning, because the way it starts quite naturally as a beginning. And so the question then comes to me: why would somebody need to add that in? Are they trying to retrospectively give authority that this is coming from people who had been, eyewitnesses? And then you bring up this Sign of Jonah it's quite a big issue, I think, because if you look at the Christians, most Christians do make a significance of the time frame in the argument when they're speaking to Muslims. They're saying, look, this is all about the 3 days and 3 times, because otherwise the only other option is that this is as Jonah was in the belly of the whale. So when you expect a man to be dead, he isn't. And that's really what the point is. So I think that's already, I think there's an undermining of the credibility of the gospel, even
straight away
3 letters in.
That's why I was shocked when I started reading it. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? It's like you said, this guy seems to be writing history in a sense, rather than being there and getting an eyewitness account as such. And he's not claiming inspiration. Like he's not claiming to be writing the word of God, but he's writing because it seemed like a good idea to him at the time.
I just want to point out that he doesn't actually use the word investigating. Rather, he uses the word parakolutheo, which just means he follows the thought of the of the narrative from section to section. So a lot of people misread that as investigating. But if he did that, then we run into some problems. Why? Because if he is the one that did investigating and he's the one that examined his sources, then that implies that the other two didn't wherever he contradicts them.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah.
And this is how it's actually interpreted by the Logos Bible commentary. They say, like, Luke, the author of Luke, is not just simply, giving us another account, but he's writing in his own view a better and more reliable account than the other gospels that he knew about. If Luke was satisfied with the other gospels, if he felt that they could give certainty, then he wouldn't have felt the need to write an orderly account so that his friend Theophilus can have certainty of the things that have been fulfilled. And often Christians point out to Luke making references to eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, and this is also assumed that Luke must have had first-hand access to these eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. Even if that is the case, they're still anonymous eyewitnesses to us, and anonymous ministers, because Luke does not name these eyewitnesses or ministers, and so all in all, it's still an anonymous source.
Yeah, I even feel more bizarre because he goes to the birth of John the Baptist. I mean,
Yep.
I mean, he's not messing around. This guy, he's going back. You know, he's not just going back to the life of Jesus. He's going to the birth of John the Baptist, and seems to know all these kind of things. And it's like, it seems like you're creating a story afterwards rather than writing what's happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you think that's enough for the Christians to get their teeth into, or do they need more?
I think they need a little bit more. There is a particular set of passages here called the Magnificat. I think it's in chapter 1. Do you remember which chapter it was in, Brother Nazam?
I've not heard of this, sorry.
Here it is, the Magnificat. Let me see. Let me see here. So the Magnificat, yeah, I think this is it here. So the Magnificat is actually of significance to Christians, both historically and theologically. So it's said to be a series of it's titled The Song of Praise, or basically, if I can read a few verses quickly, it says, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and his descendants forever. Slight problem here. The Roman Catholics take this to be outspoken by Mary, hence she's called Blessed Mary. Whereas the manuscripts differ as to whether Mary or Elizabeth actually said these words of praise. And specifically the manuscripts of Luke, where this Magnificat is mentioned, seems not to indicate who the actual speaker of the event is. And so we run into the problem of, historically, not only is this dubious, it is being used to fill the theological gap according to the Roman Catholics. And so if we have Protestants in the audience today, I hope that they can deal with the manuscript testimony on this very important historical and theological hymn or praise. So, yeah.
Because there was one thing we were going to bring up, isn't there? Finally, I know Nazam has been chomping at the bit to do this, because these are what's called the synoptics, isn't it? These three, Mark, Matthew, and Luke.
Yeah.
And because we're testing history out here, it should be the same story. You can't change the story, because if you change the story, then that thing didn't happen. It can't. Both things. So, for example, when Jesus was apparently on the cross, and I think is it in the Gospel of Mark or Matthew, they were berating him, and then in the Gospel of Luke, one of them's defending him.
That's right.
And in the Gospel of Mark, apparently at the tomb, the women are told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee because that's where he's going to be. Yeah, well, in Luke, there's no mention of Galilee, and it's all about Jerusalem.
Exactly.
So, with the disciples of Galilee or Jerusalem, historically, it can't all be true. It just can't be. You can't have that and both be correct, be writing history. It just can't happen. And I think this is what we're going to unravel the more we dig into this particular gospel.
Also, Luke says that Jesus was born during the governance of Cornelius, who was governor of Syria. And whereas he also says, I think Luke also says he was born during the reign of King Herod. But the problem is these two lived, basically King Herod died 10 years before Cornelius became governor of Syria. So King Herod, he died in the year 4 BC. And Cornelius became governor about 6 or 7 CE, so about 10 years apart. So Jesus couldn't have been born either during King Herod's reign or when Cornelius was governor.
Just a point on that, because we had big barneys with these Christians last time about King Herod killing the babies and all of this. Now, Mark has no birth narrative, so we don't know what happened Now in Luke, is this killing of the babies done? Is Jesus taken to Egypt by Joseph? Is this things happening?
No, in fact, Luke mentions that there was this worldwide census where Caesar Augustus wanted everyone to be registered, probably for purposes of tax, but there's no record outside of Luke. Like none of the Gospels mention it, nor does Josephus or anyone else mentions this census, which Luke says was of its first kind, and Luke says it was something that happened all over the world. So you would expect there to be like mass migration of people, migrating to their ancestry, like Josephus does in Luke, where he returns to Bethlehem because his ancestry is from Judah, and so he takes Mary with him and goes down to Bethlehem in order to register, and then Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and then eventually they return back to Nazareth.
Yeah,
which is odd as well. It doesn't make sense as well rationally.
yeah,
Because
Sorry.
why would the governors expect you to return to your ancestry to register in order for you to pay taxes where you are? They want to know where you are, not where your ancestry is from. Yeah. It's like you, brother Hamza, or like myself returning back to South Asia, to India, to register in order to pay taxes in East London. It doesn't also make rationally sense as well.
Yeah, but the other thing is, because Luke is not writing from his own eyewitness test, he's taking from eyewitnesses, like they say, and back, he's writing 30, 40 years after the event and whatever. Yeah. So, and remember, King Herod was supposed to kill the babies 70 years before that. Okay. Clearly, nobody was talking about King Herod killing any babies, because Luke would have wrote it. Luke would have mentioned it, because it would have been news. So this is just more damning light on Matthew. That story is a fabrication, that historically it didn't happen, and it was created to fulfill a butchered prophecy. It's amazing how the Christians say, "Oh, these gospels, they complement each other, different lights," and no, they expose one another.
I mean, Luke has his own motives as well. I mean, Luke also wants Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, but how both Matthew and Luke get to Bethlehem is different. Luke does it through the census, whereas for Matthew, Jesus is already born in Bethlehem. Like, that's where his family was originally from. But because of the oppression, they have to eventually flee, and they end up in Nazareth. Whereas
when you say oppression, you have to do this, because of the oppression.
Okay. Because of the so-called oppression,
So-called oppression, yes.
That's quite interesting, because what your brothers are saying, we're talking about historical facts here. So here we have the killing of babies, which was historically dubious, and that was used as a method to try and get Jesus into a certain position, a certain place. And now we have this census, which is also historically dubious, which is used by a different author who had access to Mark. And so
if I may point out one thing, Dr. Imran, it's that it said that in the same commentary that Nazam had mentioned from Logos, the Hermania series.
So thanks. Okay. Yeah.
No worries. That's what I was reading from earlier. So that's my secret source. In that commentary, it mentions that whoever wrote the gospel attributed to Luke was either Macedonian or from Rome. So it's almost impossible that there would be, if he was a historian, and there was this significant worldwide, he is in the best place to reference information about it, yet it seems to contradict him because there is no evidence of this. So the problem is, if he lived in Rome and he's claiming a census happened and he had the best of historical records before him, then his mentioning of this goes against that entire narrative that he's from one of those two places. I want to point out one contradiction that we spent some time on.
Can I just very quickly just say, we're not arguing from silence, by the way. It's not that we're trying to argue from silence, but it's like it's when you expect there to be evidence. So it's not like absence of evidence with is not evidence of absence, except when you now expect there to be evidence, because we have other details in the life of Caesar Augustus, other documentations about other events, but we don't have any record of any such census of its kind. Only Luke mentions it, and nobody else.
Well, this changes things for us as Muslims, right? Because technically, depending on which date you prefer, Herod or the census, either you go 5 years or like 10 years on one side. So if the thing is, if you can't even get the year in which God was born right, what does that tell you about historical accuracy and the calendar of events and it being in living memory? It would be strange if none of us, like for example, when was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam born? We know the year 570. What year did he begin to preach and receive revelation? The year 610. The Muslim sources don't dispute this. What year did he die? 632. We can reference that off the top of our heads. But when you have a document that is inspired by God, and not just one, but 4 of them, and it presents you with a timetable that is haphazard, they're in stark disagreement with each other, and where you expect them to overlap and they don't, that is not the argument from silence. That's basic historical research. You compare to see, do the stories line up? And if they don't line up, why not? And that's one of the purposes behind these streams, pretty much. Yeah.
And just to repeat, we're not dealing with theology. So don't come on and say it's the word of God or it's the inspired word of God, so he didn't need to be there and all of these things. We're not dealing with theology right now. And to be honest with you, as I said many, many times, once you refute the historical claims, then that can't be God anyway, because God wouldn't make mistakes or need to invent history and all of these things. So Christians to come on is about the historical claims that are being made by you guys.
Someone in the chat, may Allah reward them. We've had 2 donations so far. May Allah reward you both. I missed the name of the first person, but the second one, Styhawk, has written something beautiful. Ijaz the Father, Ijaz the Son, and Ijaz the Spirit gives you.
The Trinity.
I do want to
the
mention.
tree.
Gordon Nickel liked my tweet about Professor Gordon Nickel liked my tweet about my breakdown of where my name comes from. So that caught me. Nickel, good job there. Dr. Imran, you were commenting on what we had said so far. Do you want to chime in or continue where you left off from? You're muted, by the way.
Okay. So I'm just I'm actually already. I mean, even though this is known, when you put this together in this way and you highlight the problems, the lateness of the manuscripts, you're talking about the fact that there were many different gospels that Luke was referring to he didn't think was sufficient, so he decided to do his own specific compilation from whatever thoughts that were going around, and then he makes things difficult for the other gospel writers. So Mark talks about the Herod and the killing of the babies. And then we have him after doing his whatever research he did to sort of compile this evidence together and looking at the sources, including it appears he had access to Mark, writes a completely different thing, talking about a census that again has no record of having ever occurred. The historicity seems to be already so questionable. So then the question really comes: what was Luke actually doing? If he knew that it wasn't historical, why is he writing this? What's the purpose behind it? And I think that might come out in some of the comparisons between the changes of the words and the things that happen within the Gospels. But it would be good, to, I think, at this point to get some Christian brothers and sisters to come and maybe talk about or reflect on what we've said.
Even we welcome criticism as well and corrections as well.
Yeah, there's one thing that we didn't mention, and that's because we went in depth on it last week. But we spoke at length about the contradicting genealogies given. And just to reiterate the conclusion that our Christian friends came to last week, they believe that the genealogy given, I think it's Luke chapter 3, the genealogy given there is actually of Mary, but the author, the historian, quote unquote, Luke, wrote Joseph. We're meant to replace the name Joseph with Mary and read it as such. So that's apparently an error that the historian did. I don't know, or God inspired him to write it that way. I don't know. I want to point out one other thing that the scholars have mentioned, which is if you read the two genealogies, again, they say they don't just differ in the number of people, but they also differ in the names, identity, and the identities of these people. So either Luke had a bad source, or Matthew did, or potentially both were just making it up as they go along. Who knows at this point?
Do we have any questions in the back, Ben?
You're muted,
Yes,
Ben.
we do. So we got Frank waiting. Do you remember Frank from last time?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's bring Frank on. Hey, Frank.
Oh, good morning, men. Or good night, men. I guess it's
It's night for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Frank.
It's good to see you again. I'd like to read you something, and I'd like you to tell me where it's from. Okay. Okay. So this says, "Oh Lord, how shall I have a son, seeing I'm very old and my wife is barren?" I'll read you another one. "Oh my Lord, how shall I have a son when no man has touched me?" Do you know where that's from?
Quran.
Is it Surah Imran and Maryam?
Yeah, family of Imran, right?
Okay.
Actually, also from, well, the first one's from Luke chapter 1, verse 18, and the second one's from Luke chapter 1, verse 34. It's almost word for word. And you've got a whole bunch of stuff that's in Luke 1 that appears both in family of Imran and then in Maryam, it's repeated. So, like, when atheists can criticise the Gospels, and they can go to town, they can say whatever they like, but if you guys are believing Muslims, you have to take into account what the Quran says.
But
You
we're
can't
going
just
to be
take everything.
though. We like last stream. We said that after the four Gospels, we're going to be doing the Quran. We're going to actually do 4 series on the Quran where you can criticize it. You can come from any of the different.
I'm not criticising the Quran here. What I'm saying is,
Oh, it's up for the
Frank,
chat. It's fine.
Frank.
the Quran is confirming the words that Luke said, the very words that Luke says.
Frank, does the Quran confirm everything Luke says?
Sorry?
Does the Quran confirm everything Luke says?
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that. But the thing is, like you started off by saying, you know, how can Luke starts off with these birth narratives? You know, how can he even know about that? And yeah, because they happened before, probably before.
There's a huge difference there. There's a huge difference. We believe the Quran's from God, therefore he would know, and Luke isn't. That's the whole point.
But you see, you've got Luke here. There's a conversation happens between an angel and, in the first case, Zechariah. In the second case, it's between an angel and Mary. Like, you know, who was there to hear the conversation? Nobody.
God.
And here's Luke. Here's
God.
Luke telling you, pardon?
God was there. Listen.
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly.
Frank,
Goes there. But
Frank, you've done exactly what you did last week. You came in with a question and ignored everything we've said so far. See, yes, you have, Frank, because theology is not on the table here. You keep coming with theology. We're dealing with history that your New Testament claims, that you claim that your authors of your Gospels are writing history. Okay, so we're testing that claim. So, of course, we're going to ask, where did Luke get his information from? And why did he not report the killing of the babies like Matthew did? And why is he contradicting things written by Mark, who was apparently the scribe of Peter? These are the things we're questioning. The Quran has not going to help you here, because I know you don't believe what you believe as a Christian because of what the Quran says. I know that. So there's no need to bring the Quran to the table.
look, I'm responding directly to what you claim you just made. You started for saying, how can Luke talk about the birth narratives? You know, you just...
No, we didn't say that. We said, how can Luke contradict the other gospel on the birth narratives? First thing, yeah. Second thing, how did he know about the birth narrative of Zechariah? How did Luke know this? All right, let me ask you the question, Frank. How did Luke know?
What did he say at the very beginning? He's talked to the people.
So you're saying Luke has spoken to people who were at an event 70, 80 years prior and told him, no?
Put it the other way. Who would have known what the angel said to Mary?
It's got nothing to do with it.
Mary knew.
It's got nothing to do with it. We're talking about Luke here, and we're testing his historical... No, we're testing...
So this is evidence that
Frank,
Luke...
Frank, we're dealing
to Mary.
We're dealing with Luke. The
Yeah, I
Quran
know.
is going to help you. Luke claimed to write these things, and I'm asking simple questions. Where he got the information from? Now you're saying he got it from eyewitnesses at the birth.
From Mary.
No,
From
the birth
Mary.
from Mary.
Or someone close to Mary. And it, see, and the veracity is proved, like you're saying, like it's there in the Quran, the same words.
Right, no, listen,
You
Frank,
possibly know.
the Quran doesn't help you here.
I'm sorry, but it does. Look, we have the very words the angel said to Zechariah and to Mary. And it's the same words in the Quran as in Luke.
The Quran, we believe the Quran's from God, yes? Yes.
Well, I'm not sure if you really believe it, but anyway, carry on.
We believe the Quran is from God, yes?
Yeah.
Right. So whatever's in the Quran, God will know, yes?
Sorry?
If it's written in the Quran, we believe it's God from God's knowledge, yes?
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
That's what we believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So we're asking the question, where did Luke get the information from? Because you can't ask where God get the information. Where did God get the information from? Where did Luke get the information from?
And I'm saying it because he spoke, like it's probably to Mary or someone very close to Mary because, and it shows he got it right because, well, if you believe the Quran, then he got it right.
Really?
Because he got the same words.
All right. But the things that he got wrong, what about them?
No, well, which
Who
you
is the
saying?
standard?
I'm saying that I just
Frank, who is the standard of your history?
Pardon?
Who is the standard of your history? Is Mark, Matthew, or Luke the standard?
You've got 4 witnesses. Like in the Old Testament, it always talked about you needed the testimony of 2 witnesses. You know, like before you could stone somebody or something like that, you need the testimony of 2 witnesses. Here you got the testimony of 4 witnesses.
What if those 2 witnesses disagreed with each other?
Well, that's the whole point.
Would you accept that testimony?
By and large, the witnesses agree. But I'm saying the Quran here, the Quran here is a witness to
Here's the
Luke.
problem, Frank. If the witnesses disagree, yeah, can you accept that testimony?
You have to take what they agree on.
No, if they disagree, how would you know?
Can I ask a question, guys?
Yeah.
Hi, Frank. Hi, nice. I just want to ask you. Sorry, go on. Hamza, you're about to say something. Or?
Yeah, I was going to say, and these people were not eyewitnesses. That's the whole point as well. Anyway, go on.
So, Frank, I just wanted to ask a question. So, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that if the information is from Revelation, then it doesn't really matter who it's come to or who it's not come to. And so, what we've done specifically in our discussions is we're trying to leave the theology aside and deal with the historical point specifically. So, we've raised a few historical things that we thought were quite relevant. Let me just give you one of those examples. So Mark says that Jesus was born at a time when Herod was ruling. Yeah, let me just put it very, very sort of straightforwardly.
Yeah.
And Luke says now this is when Quirinius was the governor of Syria, which would have included the area of Palestine. The difference in that is a timing of, let's say, approximately 10 years. Yeah, from about 6 BC to 4 CE.
But hang on.
Which of that time, of those 2 different dates that are given in those 2 different gospels, from a historical perspective, which one do you give credence to?
Look, every historical fact or every historical bit of information needs to be weighed. Now, I don't have manuscripts or anything behind me, but the date you're saying for Quirinius, how do you know that's true? How do you know it's correct date?
I missed that. Say that, Frank.
How do you know that date you've just given for Quirinius is true, is the exact date?
Yeah,
everything in history is up for discussion.
As well as its inscription as well. There's an inscription that mentions Cornelius Governus as well as Josephus. So it's based upon outside external sources.
So what we have, what Nazam is saying, Jazakallah Nazam for that. So what Nazam is saying is that there is extra biblical evidence that corroborates the time when Quirinius was in the governor of Syria.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know from the historicity of the naming of when the people were governing the area that Herod died before Quirinius was the governor. So then we have the narrative in Mark which talks about the killing of the babies, because of the same event, the birth of Jesus. And then we have the census under Quirinius, which is what Luke is talking about. Now, historically, these are a decade apart, at least, and they're not the same times, obviously. So, and it's not like a year or 2 year. We're talking about a decade. So of those, so the question really is historically, and that's what we're asking, Frank. We're not trying to be pejorative. We're not nitpicking. We're saying from a historical perspective, which one would you say in your mind as a Christian? So you could have a couple of options. You don't accept any of them. You accept one or the other, or it doesn't matter. You can say it doesn't matter, because that also raises significant things for Muslims to look at, because then we think, if the information within the Gospels isn't significant, i.e. the words that are used by the Gospel writers who you would say are under inspiration from the Holy Spirit, if they're not in themselves significant and accurate, what do we have to go on? So this is why we're dealing with it from a historical perspective. Sorry, Frank, go on, you were saying.
Yeah. All dates in history, like remember at the time, they didn't know it was 4 BC or 5 AD because, we've got the dating system. All dates in history that we got back from there, they're all relative to something there, because the third year of somebody's reign, so it's all a network of interrelated facts. Now, I don't have access to all that information at my fingertips to produce, the stellar or whatever where a date is, but neither do you. You don't have all that accurate data. You aren't qualified historians, so we're talking about stuff that other people have said in other people's books. But the thing, what I'm trying to draw back to is that as Muslims...
Nazam quoted a qualified historian.
Who?
Josephus.
Josephus, for example.
But just like, so when you say Josephus, like the thing, I tried to find out which book of Josephus you were quoting last time. And I think it might be the 15th volume of his Antiquities of the Jews. I'm not sure, but it's not enough just to say Josephus said it. You need to give which book it's in, where it is, because it's just something floating in the air. But the thing is, that's concrete.
Historian, though. Do you believe Josephus? Do you believe Josephus was a qualified historian?
Sorry?
Do you accept that Josephus was a qualified historian?
Well, no, he wasn't.
He wasn't.
He wasn't. When you say qualified, he's in the historians union. No, he was a man who wrote at the time all his stuff. Okay, he was pushing a particular political point. So there's a lot of stuff in there which you've got to weigh it.
I'm getting your point, Frank,
against other things.
But can I just make one point, Frank? So I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the way you're coming from. I'd have to say that what we're doing is we are comparing two people who are said to be contemporaneous, who had written about an event that they either were themselves eyewitnesses or saw or spoke to people who were eyewitnesses. These are the claims made for Mark. This is the claims made for Luke. They had access to people who were eyewitnesses. And we're just comparing their story together with each other. And when we do that, we find quite significant differences. So a 10-year gap in... so you said one of the ways that people work out dates is relative to certain events. So the third year of somebody's reign, etc. So we have two people who reigned in an area. We have one person who was before and one person who was after. We have one of the Gospels writing about the event happening, i.e. the birth of Jesus, during the reign of an individual. And then we have another Gospel writer who's writing about the event, the birth of the same individual under the reign of another individual who is a different individual. And we know that these individuals, one came before, one came after. So even if you don't want to go into the dates and say we're going to narrow it down exactly to this date, 4 CE or 6 BC, however you want to do it, we definitely have two Gospel writers who are talking about the birth of Jesus under two separate governors of the area. Only one of those can be right, theoretically. Well, actually, they could both be wrong, but let's just assume one of them is right. The question really is that as from a historical basis, who would you say Jesus was born under? Which person who was ruling the area at the time was Jesus born under? Was it under Herod or was it under Quirinius?
That is not a question that can be dealt with on a live stream. That's a whole PhD thesis to go into what the facts are known. And I'm trying to draw it back to the things that we both that you agree is true. You agree, you believe the Quran's true. How does Luke get this information, which then the Quran's saying it too, this conversation between an angel and Zechariah with Mary, how does Luke know that? Now, you've asked me how I know. Well, how Luke got it. Well, I'm saying either he got it from Mary or it was a direct revelation from God. But the thing is, it's the same words. Or you've got all these facts which, about like, well, I could ask you, who is Zechariah? Why does he suddenly turn up in the Quran?
So, Frank, I've very patiently listened to what you have to say, and I do enjoy listening to you because you do have a very nice way of speaking. You mimic the doctor.
It's Australian accent. You know, we invented the English language, and you blokes are speaking some weird dialect.
I gotta tell you, I tell people, us in the West Indies, we invented roti, but they don't believe me. You know how it works. So, Frank, just work with me here, yeah? Do you believe that scripture is revealed for us to know things about the world? Like God wants us to recognize and see things and confirm that this is a truth which testifies to the accuracy of scripture?
Up to a point.
Okay. So
he's not teaching us science or history but it's about God. It's about Jesus. That's the primary purpose of it.
So do you believe that the New Testament mentions historical facts in any capacity, or is it purely a theological work to you?
And Luke in particular, like in each of the first 3 chapters, he gives you this list of governors and all the rest of it to pin down where these things happen. And at the very minimum, you've got to say, well, at least he's acknowledging, like, he's got people that existed. You can argue about the dates of it, but these are people that existed at the time.
But you see, Frank, that's part of the problem, right? If he gives us this information to help us pinpoint when X happened at Y time, and then we do take up the initiative to use that information and try to verify it, and it doesn't line up, the problem then isn't with our understanding, but with the way that the information is laid down. Would you agree with that? I mean, you yourself mentioned it might take an entire PhD to verify just the first verse of the 2nd chapter of Luke. If that is what it takes, what makes you feel that you or any other Christian can plainly understand the truth, or so to speak, of Scripture on a basic level?
Because for the vast majority of people, they're not qualified in history or whatever. It's God's truth speaking to us. That's what we're meant to take. That's what Jesus is speaking to us. He's giving us God's message, and that's all. That's what we're supposed to take out of it.
Would it be satisfactory for you if I, as a Muslim, took out everything from the Gospel of Luke that disagreed with history and just worked with the stuff that I think God mentioned?
Well, it's not really going to work then, because it is given in a historical context, and I think you won't deny that. It's like you know roughly when it happened.
Well, not exactly.
Within a year.
Not within a year. It's 10 years. I mean, if it was 1 year, I can understand, right? Because different calendars in the ancient world, that's normal. But when it's almost a decade plus, then that raises questions. But your answer just now struck me because you said, well, it's given in a historical context. Let me ask you a question. This is not meant to be offensive, it's just a point of comparison. Have you ever read the Harry Potter books at all?
I've read one, I think. Yeah, I don't know if I read the whole thing, but I know I did have a look at it to see what was in there.
Let me tell you, my childhood was based on Harry Potter, basically, and I absolutely love that series of books. But the same problem occurs because in the Harry Potter books, it gives us details about our current world. It gives us details about places in London throughout the entire series. Now, that too can be said to have been written in a historical context, because it mentions plain facts about the world which are observable and contemporaneous with the author. Now, the same thing happens with the Gospels. We can read it, but just because it mentions some things in historical context does not mean that the entirety of that message is historical. And that confuses me, because on the one end, you want us to look at this book as a theological work primarily with historical points of data that we can use to validate this narrative. But then when we use those same points of data and they invalidate the narrative, why is that the fault of the Muslim? Why is it not a fault of the author himself who misuses these data points, so to speak?
Well, just first off, so with Harry Potter, from the facts she gives about London, some person in the future could work out roughly when J.K. Rowling was writing from those things.
Yes.
It's the same with Luke. We can look back and we can see when he was writing from the things he's talking about.
But the thing is, Frank, he's not writing his own experience. That's the thing. He's writing what he's heard, apparently. And the problem with that is he's contradicting people before him who were Mark apparently was a disciple of Peter, and he's contradicting people like that. And Matthew, who I think you believe maybe he's Matthew the disciple, he spoke about King Herod and all of these in the birth narrative. Luke doesn't mention this. So this is what we're saying to you. If two different people are writing history but writing different things, what is your standard to know who is right and who is wrong?
What you call a contradiction is just one person mentions one thing, somebody else mentions something else. It's not a contradiction. No,
a contradiction is saying something that someone else says something different about that same thing. So, for example, on the cross, the two besides him are abusing him verbally. And in Luke, one is abusing him, one is defending him. So this is a clear contradiction. And I think in the Gospel of Mark, the women are told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee. But in the Gospel of Luke, there's no mention of Galilee. It's all about Jerusalem. Now, you can't mean Galilee and Jerusalem at the same time to witness the appearance. So these are contradictions in history. The two things can't happen simultaneously. It's just impossible.
Well, no. For example, on the cross, right? The two men both start off mocking Jesus, and in the end, one of them changes.
No, in Luke, he's not mocking him. In Luke, he's defending him.
No, as I was saying, initially, they may have both been mocking.
And here's the
end. But the other thing is, when you, and I'd say that this is the way the Gospels work. If you try and get accounts of an event from just any group of people about any event, you're going to get stories that don't quite agree. The fact that there's small discrepancies almost verifies that these are independent accounts.
But there's a flaw in that argument, Frank. That argument only works if the people writing are eyewitnesses. But they're not eyewitnesses. They're all writing hearsay, as we've demonstrated.
Luke admits he's not an eyewitness, but he's spoken to people he's saying are eyewitnesses.
I don't think he mentioned specifically that he spoke to eyewitnesses, but that he believes the information he has descends from them.
Well, what does he say? He says, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the very first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word.
Handed down to us, meaning he didn't speak with the eyewitnesses, but allegedly the information he believes comes from them.
Yeah.
Do you agree with Luke when he said there was many other Gospels?
Well, yeah.
Really?
So he's not nominated Matthew and Mark specifically, but of course people wrote stuff down, but they not everything that was written down became a gospel. They might not have been full accounts. And look, even when the story of how the Qur'an was put together, people have got stuff written on leaves and bones, all sorts of stuff. I'm just saying this is how stuff's collected.
Sorry, guys, I just muted you on the reason, a technical reason. It's just Frank, when you're not talking, do you mind muting for us? Because there's a massive echo coming from your computer. Is that okay, mate?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
All right. Let me ask a simple question, Frank, and then I think Ijaz has to say something.
I'll just put some headphones in. Maybe that'll make it better.
It will help, actually. Thank you, Frank.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Thank you as well, Ben. Good job on that.
That's right.
Proper moderator. Where's Robert?
Okay.
I thought we fired that Robert guy. What's going on here?
Let me ask you a question, Frank. Do you believe there are any contradictions in the Gospels?
Well, it depends what you mean by contradictions.
All right, let me rephrase. How do you understand the term contradiction?
Well, if they're saying opposite things, that's a contradiction. But
So
there are
if
things which I'd say show people looking from a different perspective.
So you don't believe there's contradictions?
Not really, no.
Right. So what would you accept a contradiction as?
It doesn't work that way. Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Ooh, can I go?
Go on.
Okay. Luke versus the Gospel of Mark, I think, on Jairus' daughter. I think Luke says she is dying, and then at some point, the lady touches Jesus' clothing. Jesus speaks with her, and then immediately after it's followed up in Luke by a messenger or something saying she has died. Jairus' daughter has died. However, I think in Mark's Gospel, it starts off as when they come off the boat, Jairus approaches them and says, "My daughter has died." And I think Matthew's Gospel agrees with Luke, but Mark disagrees with both Matthew and Luke. So it's not just a different narrative altogether. The sequence of events does not line up as well. So do you want to take a look at that with us, Frank? Would that be okay?
Okay, and I'll admit, in some places it'll say that the man himself came and asked. In other places it will say he'll have sent a message.
No, in all three Gospels, he's the one at the boat when Jesus comes off. He's the leader of the synagogue. So you can go to Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And it's good that we can do this live on air. I'm happy that you're willing to look at it. Do you want me to read out the verses, or do you want to?
When Jesus had crossed over back to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. And one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come put your hands on her so that she'll be healed and live." So Jesus went him.
Right, now let's go to Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. Matthew chapter 9, verse 18.
Yep.
While he
was saying this, the ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples.
Right, so in Mark, she's dying. In Matthew, she has just died. This is the second he comes off the boat. Now go with me to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8. This is where it gets dicey.
Chapter 8, verse 40.
Yes. I can't even count now.
Sorry, verse 42 specifically, if you want. The corresponding verse is verse 42.
So Luke chapter 8.
Then a man named Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Mm-hmm. And Jesus, on his way, the crowds was questioning him.
Okay, and can you read for me?
49?
Is it 49? Yes, from 49 onwards.
While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher."
So you see the problem in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Jairus comes to him and says, "My daughter is dying or about to die." But that's in Mark and in Luke. But in Matthew, he comes and says, "My daughter has died," I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you're right.
It's a fundamental difference, because if the story happens in the way that Matthew says, then this messenger coming to say she has just died can't happen. Do you get that?
Yeah, see, I guess you are looking at the Gospels as if we're saying this is dictated by God, every single word.
Hold on, Frank. I'm going to call you out here, Frank. Hold on. You said to me a contradiction is when two things say the opposite of each other. Do you consider this to be a contradiction in the narratives?
Not really. It's like the fact that it's Jairus, girl died, synagogue ruler, all the main things are there. You've got some little details. Look, I'll just give you an example.
No, Frank. Let's not go to another example.
I want to show you. This is how people report things, right?
Frank, please, 1 second, right? It's not a minor detail when the major theme is about the death of this young girl, and it gets the order in which she died wrong. Either she died from the very start when Jairus comes, or she died afterwards when Jairus is already there with Jesus. That is not a matter of it's a minor thing. It changes the entire narrative of that story.
Okay, I'll say, where was it the Mark one that said my daughter's just died?
No, Matthew says
Matthew.
Matthew's the odd one out.
Okay, I'll say that was probably not correct.
Was it contradiction?
It was probably like a summary of.
It's a contradiction. Just say the words contradiction.
Look, Hamza, I'll pull you up on this.
Go on.
Go right ahead.
And this is how people report things. Like
Well,
you,
Are you
like
saying
I
he's
said that
telling
last
story?
week. Last week, you said that Matthew is a liar and a manipulator, right?
Is that what I said?
Yeah, and you said to me, no.
Frank. Sorry, before you
No.
continue, I'm not going to allow you to build on your false premise. Listen, I'll tell you exactly what I said. I believe the author of Matthew was a liar. Yes.
No, that's what you think you said.
That's what I
If
said.
you go back to the video, you did not have the words "the author."
I always say the author of Matthew.
One second,
I'm
Frank.
sure he said
Frank, it's not a contradiction between what Darren says and what the video says. It says the same thing. They just differ in minor ways. The main theme is still there. The Hamza said something about
The
Matthew.
author of the Matthew is a liar.
And I agree. But that's how people's recollection. I do not expect the gospel writers to have, and it was in a different language even probably. So what they're saying, the exact wording is probably not going to be right.
But if they have a copy of Mark's gospel in front of them, then they don't need to remember. They just simply need to copy Mark. But in this example, Matthew seems to have revised or changed Mark's gospel, whereas Luke has faithfully copied or reproduced Mark.
But see, it shows. But that shows it is an independent record.
It's dependent on
They did not feel compelled to write down what the other person said.
But Luke did write down what Mark said.
In
But
this example, Luke
Mark doesn't have.
Well, Luke is slavishly copying Mark in this episode, but Matthew doesn't just slavishly copy Mark. He also changes Jairus' word so that Jairus, instead of saying my daughter is about to die, he said my daughter just died.
By the way, I just note that we've gone a long way from just looking at Luke. We're looking at all the Gospels, but that's separate.
Frank,
No. The reason we're looking at the other Gospels is because now we've got to the Gospel of Luke. We're going to highlight the difference amongst the Gospels now.
Yeah, and the thing is,
different Gospels, but we're not got to the Qur'an yet.
Yeah.
We're not got to the Gospel of John yet. We're not got to Paul yet, and we're not got to the Church Fathers yet. We touched on them. Yeah.
and what's really interesting is that Luke is the Gospel which appears in the Quran. It's the Luke account.
Okay, let me just kill this.
Account which
Let me just kill this bird quickly. All right. Do you understand what the Quran is?
I think I've got a reasonable idea. Yep.
All right. Well, we believe the Quran is correcting and confirming what came before it. Okay. So, a broken watch is right twice a day. Okay. So if the Luke got it right with regards to the birth narrative of John the Baptist and such, alhamdulillah, no problem. We have no issue with that. The Quran confirms it, alhamdulillah. If the Quran corrects it, alhamdulillah. We don't say everything in the New Testament today is false. We don't say it's all forgeries and all fabrications.
You are saying that.
No, we're not.
No,
we're not. We believe there's truth in there. We have no issue with that. And we need the Qur'an to tell us what is true or not. So, for example, we have not challenged the idea of Zachariah and Elizabeth having the baby and Mary being visited by we're not challenging this. Now, if you were challenging this, you would have a point. But we're not, because the Quran confirms it. We have no issue. Was Mary a virgin? The Quran confirms it. We have no issue. So with the Quran, it will confirm and correct what came before it. Yeah, that's what we believe. And we believe God is the author of the Quran. So that's why he would know what happened and what didn't happen. Now, when we come to the Gospels we're referring to, Matthew and Luke, these are just men who are not even writing their own eyewitness testimony. It's second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand, maybe fifth-hand eyewitness testimony. But you Christians are reading as if they're writing verbatim eyewitness testimony. And this is the problem. And when you have that belief, and then these two testimonies contradict each other, you got a problem historically. And this whole series we're doing is just about the history and the historical claim. And we're coming from a neutral position. Sorry, 1 second, guys. We're asking you Christians why you believe this, why you believe that. Why do you think this is true? How do you explain that? How do you understand that? And when we do the Qur'an, you can come on, Frank, and ask these questions. No problem whatsoever. And we'll bat them all out of the park. No problem at all. Anyway, Ijaz.
Yeah. So Frank, generally, I think that this discussion has largely run its course. But I do have a question for you. It's kind of breaking the topic. You don't have to answer it. But I think you had mentioned that you believe the author of Luke was inspired to write this. Was that correct, Frank?
Oh, he was inspired, yeah. But I'm not saying it was dictated to him.
How do you know it was inspired? That the author of Luke was inspired?
Well, Peter describes all scripture as being inspired by God. So,
yeah, but this has been written after Peter, not before.
Sorry?
This has been written after Peter, not before.
Well, that's in one of Peter's letters. He says it later. But scripture is inspired. It's men moved by God, like the Holy Spirit moved it to.
Frank, hold on. Does Luke say that he was moved by the Spirit in some way to write this, or that he was inspired in some way to write this? No. So that what has happened is you see that Peter allegedly says all scripture is God-breathed and inspired, whatever the case may be.
Is that Peter or Paul?
Peter, Second Timothy. So I think it's Paul.
Second Peter. I think he's referring to men were moved by the Holy Spirit and they spoke.
Yeah.
But between the speaking and the writing, there's a gap.
Yes.
But 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all scripture is God-breathed.
God-breathed. Okay.
Frank, how would you understand that? What's scripture according to you?
Sorry? What?
In that verse where it says all scripture is inspired by God, even though the Gospels weren't written at this point, what do you believe scripture is? In this context.
It's the Bible as we have it.
But it wasn't written.
It was in the process of being written at the time. But he was talking in a general sense that scripture is inspired by God.
The letter of Timothy was written before the Gospels. So it can't be referring to the Gospels.
That's a whole question in itself.
No, it's a statement. It's a statement of fact.
But the thing I really wanted to hammer home, though, is that how did Luke know about conversations between an angel and Zechariah and Mary, and those conversations appear in the Qur'an? You've got almost the same wording. How did he know that if this wasn't from God?
Frank, here's my agreement with you. I'll make this deal with you right now. I'm going to quote President Trump, let's make a deal. What I'm going to offer you is, on the streams that we do on the Quran, I would actually keep a spot for you to come on and ask me that specific question live. And we will spend time with you as much as you want discussing that point. Will you agree to that, Frank? Would you be willing to come on?
Yeah, I may do, but yeah.
Because if I have to get into the Quran now, one, it's going to technically.
But see, I'm not talking about the Quran really. I'm just saying that the Quran is confirming Luke, and like the Quran repeats it confirms the Gospel.
I've explained to you the Quran can confirm and correct. So if something that Luke said, like I said, a broken watch can be right twice a day. So if Luke did hear from somebody who heard from Mary or from Elizabeth or somebody, and he got that information correct, alhamdulillah, no issue, mate. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean everything Luke wrote now is historically incorrect, because it clearly isn't, because it contradicts what the other authors wrote. But you don't accept the contradiction. That's our problem.
But see, if Luke tells you that Jesus got off a boat and fed some people, well, that's just, anybody could have seen that. But for what an angel spoke to Mary or what an angel spoke to Zechariah, people weren't there to see it.
No, but I'm sure Zechariah told somebody, or Elizabeth may have told somebody, or Mary. Yeah. So, like I said to you, if that's where he got the information from, we have no issue with that. Honestly, we don't. The issue.
But that means he was close to the action.
No,
he was
it
close to those people.
No, it just means he may have heard some information that was correct. Doesn't make all of his information correct. Because if you think all of his information is correct, then you've got a problem with the other gospels now. But you don't accept this contradiction. That's the problem. That's the problem we're having.
I think you're blowing up minor points as contradictions.
Okay. Why didn't Luke mention King Herod killing babies?
And it was already in another gospel. He didn't need to.
Sorry?
It was in another gospel, so he didn't need to. So he's filling in the gaps of what, like he's saying that there's other gospels already. He's filling in the gaps that aren't there.
Where does he say he's filling in the gaps that aren't there?
Well, I'm just saying that could be what the path he's taking.
It sounds like he's leaving out stuff. It sounds like he's leaving out stuff. Like, for example, in Mark, when the Pharisees ask for a sign, and Jesus says, "No sign shall be given," and then in Luke, there is a sign. So what happened there?
So if it says exactly the same, then you say, well, he's just copying. If it says something different, you say, well, it's a contradiction.
Well, it does say something different. So it's a
but
contradiction.
he's giving you extra information.
No, he's
contradicts.
No, Mark says there'll be no sign. That's it. No sign. And Jesus walks away. In Luke, there'll be no sign but the sign of Jonah. In Matthew, it goes into 3 days and 3 nights and all that business. So there's a contradiction here. Did Jesus say those words or not?
No. Mark is a very short gospel. Everything's truncated.
Mark is quoting Peter, apparently.
Yeah, but it is.
So who's closer to the action, Peter or Luke?
Peter was closer to the action.
Right. So if Mark's quoting Peter and he says Jesus says there'll be no sign, how can Luke add on this except the sign of Jonah?
As I say, Mark contracts things. It is a very.
But Frank, to be frank with you, I hope you like that one.
I've never heard that before.
I guarantee you haven't.
Really.
Frank, just to wrap up here, because we do want to give other Christians the opportunity.
And I need to get to work, actually.
Sorry we've kept you, Frank, but thank you for coming on. Thank you for your time. And God willing, maybe you can join us in the next stream, or when we discuss the topic of the Qur'an, we will look out for your name. And if I don't find your name there, Frank, I will be upset.
Oh, Frank, have a good day, mate.
All right.
Yeah, right, mate.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah. See you then.
Good day, man.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
That was a lively discussion.
That was a lot more productive, I feel, than last time.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
But the thing is, though, we reduced it to a very simple fact. Do you believe the New Testament contains contradiction? And his answer was no. And then when you showed him blatant contradiction, that's not a contradiction. That's not true. That's a correction. What's the contradiction there?
I think there is an element quite clearly of the theology superseding historicity.
I think Frank feels that we're being inconsistent in our behavior because we're using maybe one standard for the Quran and a different standard for the Bible, and he feels like he's pointing this contradiction out to us in that we accept on the one hand the Quranic narrative, but then we're very critical when it comes to Luke's gospel. But I like the point Brother Hamza made that a broken clock can be right twice
a day. Yeah. But here's the thing, you see. If we didn't say anything on this stream, that's what Frank was coming with, because he's already said this in a YouTube comment 3 days ago about the commonality between Luke and the Quran. So he was already on this flex, and we'll say it again. The Quran confirms what came before it. Alhamdulillah. So if Luke says something, or John says something, or Paul says something that the Quran agrees with, Alhamdulillah, then there's been echoes of history recorded correctly. Yeah. So that's what we believe.
And it's possible that there were multiple birth narratives of Jesus, and it's possible that the story was passed down orally and it got changed. And
agreed.
And then,
but that's what we're challenging, though. The idea of is this historically accurate? So, for example, the birth narrative. I mean, the King Herod killing babies is a massive part of the birth narratives of Matthew. I mean, Joseph and Mary have to flee to Egypt. Yet when it comes to Luke, this story's not there.
Yeah, and just as the census as well is a massive part of Luke's birth narrative, but it's not in Matthew's gospel.
The way this seems to be playing out is that I don't think by and large, they understand the significance of these differences. If you took out Quirinius from the Gospel of Luke, does the narrative happen in the same way? No, it can't. If we take out Herod killing the babies in Matthew, and I think it's Mark as well. No, it's sorry, in Matthew specifically. Yeah, not Mark. Thank you. Then in this case, the whole narrative changes. So, I like to tell people it's a process. You have an input, you have a bit of calculations, and then you have an output. If the input changes, then obviously the processing will change, and you will arrive at a different output. So in this case, I understand that the Christian is trying to harmonize these differences, but harmonizing the differences does not mean that they're not differences in the first place, and that needs to be accounted for.
And I feel the problematic elements found in Luke's gospel as well as in Matthew, in the birth stories. You don't find these problematic elements in the Quranic narrative of the birth of Jesus. Like there's no census in the Quran, and there's no King Herod killing of babies 2 years and under.
If I may ask, does one of you have like a messenger thing open like Facebook? Because I'm hearing the ping. And let me just say, I'm this close to stabbing someone, and I'm not sure which one of you is going to be the victim.
Probably.
So, Ben, sorry, Doctor, I know I love you sometimes. Ben, do we have another guest waiting?
We do. We have a. It's almost like a. It's like a talk show where we get the same guest every time. So it's Rafael waiting.
Before you bring him on, I need to point out something. I hope Ben, can you put up our names on the screen again, if possible?
Yeah, of course. 1 moment.
Right.
There we go.
Everyone watching this stream, if you have a Twitter account, go to this Twitter account and follow me. I'll tell you why now. In the week, I posted that we would be having an EFDawah live stream again on Sunday, and people were responding to me and asking, wait a second, can you try to get better Christians on into the program? And my response to some of the tweets I've gotten is basically simple. The kind of Christians that we get onto the live stream tends to be people who are not scholars or academics. And so because the scholars and academics accept that there are contradictions and accept that there are problems in the text, they will not defend a point that they already accept. So the kind of people we get to come on the live streams are a little bit lesser educated, even though they may passionately believe. But these same people, because they're not as academic and they're unwilling to accept that there could be contradictions or problems in the text, these are the types of people that tend to turn up. So it's not that we've chosen these people like beforehand and asked them to come on. It's an open invitation. Even the angry pastor vowed with all his might and fury from his dancing in Ghana to come on the live stream today. And I'm not joking. I'm about to lay a truth bomb on the people. Hamza's smile was so dangerous. He refused to come on if Hamza smiled. Now, obviously, Hamza cannot not smile. So the angry pastor decided that smile, it's like a step too far. He can't come on if Hamza smiles.
What I actually said, I only laugh when people say stupid things. So just don't say stupid things and I won't laugh.
You can't avoid it with him.
But apparently he has this, he's got this president of some seminary in Ghana, and his wife has said to him he can't risk his reputation coming on the live stream. So we won't name him. I'm sure people can add the dots. But here's the thing, you see. I just want people to spot some hypocrisy here. Because if you watch a video between me and Bob in the park, you can see the angry pastor laughing and chortling away and pointing and all of this kind of stuff. So he doesn't really have an issue with laughing at people when they're making points. Yeah. So again, it's this not mock outrage thing, but it's like just excuses, just simple excuses. If you've got your academia, bring your academia. That's it, done. Don't bring your emotions, just bring your logic. That's all we ask. Frank did a good job of that today.
He actually did very well compared to the first time. But the angry pastor recently made a video about me.
Pastor Voldemort.
He who cannot be named. All this talk about Harry Potter, it's influencing the people. May Allah reward Allah Ya Tarakali, Tarakale for their nation. I want to point out that the angry pastor is a video, And I'm not making this up. I almost clipped it and put it up, but I didn't want to because people might think it's mean-spirited, of him shaking his bum and dancing to gospel music. And me and the boys sat down the other night and we were laughing at it because I've got to be honest, he dances better than he argues and he's not a good dancer. So take that as well. Okay. Yeah,
I'm not surprised he didn't come on, Ijaz, honestly.
But here's the thing, he keeps challenging me to debate and I keep pointing out to him, listen, if I'm going to debate anyone, at the minimum, they need to be there for the entire debate. If you pop out because your internet is bad, then who am I going to converse with? I don't have all night to sit down and wait for you to stick your phone out of the window to get good reception, yeah?
So is Rafael on, yeah?
Oh, God.
Yeah, he is. Should we bring him on?
Is anyone else or just him?
It's just him, unfortunately.
Oh, flipping.
Well, not unfortunately, we know. I mean, it would be nice to hear someone new, but
Sure.
here we are. Hello, Raphael. How are you?
Welcome, Rafael.
Hello,
Hi,
good afternoon.
Rafael.
Do you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah. We can hear you.
Okay, so thank you very much for telling that we are not educated. For sure, the education is something that we learn slowly. So,
Yeah, me too.
okay, so
We're all learning.
we are not educated. That's fine. That was a low blow. The other thing that he just said, this was two stream before, was also a low blow. We are paid to come on the stream. This is not something to say, Ijaz.
Raphael, hold on. These are the allegations that Christians make. I'm saying that this is not the case. We don't pay you. You got to pay better attention, my friend.
Yeah.
Good.
These are the claims that other people have made.
No,
Yeah.
you said last time that we were paid to come. Anyway,
No. People can't believe that you guys are real and that we must be paying Christians to come on to make these kind of
no,
arguments.
I already say that I'm not a scholar, not an historian. I have other type of education, so I
What?
think that should be sufficient.
Yeah, but
Okay,
if you
now-
have other types of education, but you can't get the first point right, what's the point of your education in the first place?
What do you say? The first point.
What you just said,
Yeah.
forgive me for saying this, is rubbish. I'll tell you why. I literally just said this is what people on Twitter asked me. And
No,
you came
I'm
on
not
to
talking
say,
about
He
today.
just tells me that I am not educated. I didn't say that, my friend. I'm saying this is what I was tweeted at me. Please, I want to
Okay.
be nice to you, but if you tell me something stupid, I'm going to have to respond to you. Please,
Okay,
keep it civil.
Okay. Last time I was there two streams ago, we were talking about Matthew. And you said that the tribe in Judaism are through the father. Now, I have two questions for you. Do you have
I
any
corrected
evidence?
myself. I was wrong. Thank you. Somebody.
When did you correct yourself?
Rafael, we're on the Gospel of Luke, mate.
No, because we were talking about Luke at that time.
No, we're talking about the Gospel of Luke now.
No, at that time you were talking about Luke.
That was 2 streams ago. Today is Luke.
Okay, that's why I'm talking about this. So, okay, thank you, Ijaz, to correct yourself. I wanted to ask you how did you get it, but thank you for correcting yourself. Because you claim that I was confused, so that's what I wanted to make sure that people understood that. Okay, you made a mistake.
Well, we
Okay,
both made a
now-
mistake. I just happened to make one at the very end.
Yeah, because
Not the
we're
same
all
thing.
tired.
That's too pokey.
That's why you should not. The low blow is not always something to do. Okay, now today I want to.
I didn't have a
He
low
says the
blow.
low blow is not something to do as he delivers a low
A low
blow.
blow. Raphael, I'm trying to be nice to you, but let me be clear. I don't have to be nice to you. So I'm going to
So-
beg that you keep your point straightforward and don't put words in my mouth, please. Because I'm not very nice when people put words in my mouth. I become like Hamza the lion. But I can be as cuddly as Nazam or Dr. Imran. But if I turn into Hamza, you're not going to return on the second show. Okay?
Okay, it depends on what you want, Ijaz.
I want
think this
love.
is,
I want
okay,
love.
good. So
And a
thank you.
wife.
Okay, good. That's fine. Thank you. I didn't see that you correct yourself. So let's go to the point I want to make today. Okay, the first one I want to make is about what I think it was Nazam who said. What was the sign of Jonah, and how does the sign of Jonah apply to Jesus? And you were saying that this was a problem because Jesus didn't die. All right.
What?
Yeah.
Unless that's what you know. Am I correct, Nazam?
Yes.
Really?
Well, my view is the sign of Jonah, as understood traditionally by both Jews, Muslims, and Christians, is that Jonah didn't die, and that was the sign or the miracle of Jonah.
Okay, so when you read Jonah 1:1, so it is clearly said that Jonah was calling out of Sheol. So Sheol is the realm of the dead. So how can you be calling from Sheol if you are alive?
So my response to that is, if you read the Psalms, David also uses the same word in reference to his own state. So Sheol doesn't always literally mean death. It can also be used in a figurative sense as well.
Yeah. So, but
when it's used in the book of Jonah, Jonah uses it in the figurative sense.
No, but Jonah was in. He was in the body of the whale. He was not out. We can say. Let me finish my point.
Sorry. Carry
for
on.
David, who is alive, we can say it is figurative. But for Jonah, who is already in the body of the whale, how can you say that this is theoretically someone who is swallowed by a big fish is assumed dead? So Jonah was in the realm, physically in the realm of the dead. And the realm of the dead, you know that means people who died. This is Sheol.
What?
Okay, so that's why
I mean, the fish's belly is not the place where people go to when they die, but the situation in which Jonah is in, he describes it as being as if he's dead. It's just like, for example, Isaac, for example, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9, is described as being resurrected from the dead, even though Isaac didn't physically die and rose from the dead, but his situation was such in the book of Genesis is that he had a near-death experience. So it's described as death and resurrection. Similarly, David's situation, he has a life and death situation, which is described as death. And in the same way, Jonah also has like a life and death situation.
But do you have a case? Do you have a case where someone was swallowed by a fish and came out alive?
That's what the sign is. That's what makes it a miracle.
That's why the realm of the dead in the case of Jonah.
Rafael, what's your point, mate? What's the point you're making? Because I think you've missed the point that we were making with regards to that point. So what point are you making?
I'm making my point is that Jonah, the sign of Jonah, is not only that Jesus didn't die. The sign of Jonah, let me finish. The sign of Jonah is that Jesus died and rose again. So that was the sign of Jonah.
Okay. And who was the sign for?
For everyone, people listening.
No, it wasn't. It was for the Pharisees, because they're the ones who asked for the sign.
Mm-hmm.
But the Pharisee represent people, right? So it was for Israel.
No, the Pharisees didn't represent people. The Pharisees represented the enemies of Jesus.
Yes,
and that's why Jesus referred to them as an adulterous generation, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm saying he's talking to everyone. He's not talking to only two people.
No, he's not. The Pharisees. Okay, Raphael. The Pharisees ask him for a sign.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'll give you no." According to the Gospel of Mark, he'll give no sign. According to the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, he gives the sign of Jonah. Right. So the sign is to prove to who, to what, or prove what to who.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, let me answer this. Okay, so they say there's no. You say there's no sign.
No.
What kind of sign they were looking for? They were looking for.
Okay. I'll tell you what sign they can see. What was the sign Jesus said he would give? Sign of Jonah. And you believe that is appearing after death? Yes.
Yes.
But he didn't do that, did he?
That's why when you read which gospel you say where they say there's no sign, in the sense that what they expected as a sign, a miracle, physically in front of them.
No.
That's why he said there was no.
Jesus, according to the Gospel of Luke and Gospel of Matthew, said he would perform the sign of Jonah. Yeah. You've just confirmed the sign of Jonah is appearing after you've been killed. Yes?
Yeah. But
Jesus didn't appear to the Pharisees after that, did he?
But as I said, the sign was not given to all these Pharisees. It was given to everyone. That's why we disagree.
No, it wasn't. It was who asked for the sign?
It says this is talking about this generation.
Who asked for the sign?
Okay, the Pharisee asked the sign.
Pharisees asked for the sign, right?
But the signs.
Listen, the Pharisees asked for the sign. Jesus said they shall have no sign but the sign of Jonah. So according to your understanding of the sign of Jonah, Jesus should have appeared to those after a crucifixion. Yes?
I said, Hamza, listen to me. I said Jesus is not talking. When Jesus is talking, he's not talking to one individual at a time. He's talking about everyone.
No, he's not.
Okay?
Why did you say that? Why did you say that? Why did you say he's talking about everyone?
His message is for everyone. His message
Why is it? No, where
one
does Jesus say he's talking to everyone? So everyone's an adulterous generation. Is that what you're saying?
But okay, Hamza, listen to me. Every listen to me. Let me finish. The punishment given to Israel, right, is not because.
Okay,
let me finish. Let me finish. Unless you don't want to have the truth. I'm trying to explain to you. The punishment coming to Israel when Moses gave his commandment, he said, if you sin, you will be punished. Was he talking to one individual people or the people of Israel in general?
Oh, okay. We're talking about a specific moment in the life of Jesus when a specific people asked him a specific question.
Don't avoid my point. This is an important point, okay? Because the punishment given to Israel is for every people in Israel. It's not for one individual, but the people who sin in Israel are very few. There's not every people sin. So it's the same thing. The sign, so they ask for a sign, and Jesus is saying that the sign is going to give, they will see a sign, but it's not talking to one person, it's talking to Israel. Okay, so that's the parallel I'm trying to make to you.
He's responding to the Pharisees.
But I'm not saying every sin of the leaders of Israel is a sin for Israel. That's how they are all punished for the sins of the leaders of Israel. Okay, and you can read. We can go to the Deuteronomy, and you see the commandment was given by God.
Raphael, why are you jumping through hoops, mate? We're talking about the
Bible. We need to use the history, the way the Bible has been always interpreted. Okay, a punishment given to Israel is for all Israel, even if few people sin in Israel, and the few people who sin in Israel are the leaders.
Let me ask you a question. Did the 5,000 people who got fed bread and fish, did they need a sign?
What is it? I don't get where you jump from one point to the what point you want to make.
All right, the point I'm making is this, because the Pharisees asked for this sign after the feeding of the 5,000. So those 5,000 people were already convinced. It was the Pharisees who needed convincing, and they were the ones who asked for a sign. And Jesus said, "No sign shall be given," according to Mark. That's it.
I disagree. The 5,000 saw sign, but what is telling you they were convinced?
What, the 5,000?
When Jesus made this parable about I am the flesh and you eat my flesh and so on, did they believe that? No, because they were not all convinced. They all left him.
We're talking about a specific event that apparently occurred in history where Jesus said certain things, and you believe those certain things meant a certain thing, and then certain things weren't carried out. Now you're saying it's irrelevant that it was the Pharisees who asked the question. You're saying all of Israel asked the question.
Yeah, but you are saying something which is not true.
Talking nonsense.
We're not going to agree on that, Hamza, because your understanding is wrong. Okay.
My understanding. Which part of my understanding is wrong?
That's what you say. You say the 5,000 were convinced. They were not convinced. Jesus healed people. Not many of them were not convinced. So what you're saying is not factual. How can they not convinced? Because when Jesus started, Hamza, when Jesus started talking about I am the true bread of life.
When Jesus fed the 5,000 people with 7 loaves and 3 fish, or whatever it may be, why do you not believe they were convinced?
I'm trying to explain if you let me finish. So when he made his parable about I am the true bread, okay, whoever eat my flesh will live. What did I say? What is he talking about? Jesus was showing that these people were only were material people, okay? They were not spiritual people. So yes, they were convinced that it is something as a physical miracle, but spiritually they were not, because they all left him after that. Okay, so that's why I'm saying that being convinced like this means nothing. We're not going to agree on that, Hamza, because your understanding is wrong.
What are you talking about? Where does it say that in the New Testament? What you just said to me, that these 5,000 weren't convinced by what he just did.
Do you remember the passage when Jesus said, "I am the true bread who came down from heaven"? Do you remember that passage? You want me to read that for you?
Listen to me. We're talking about this event that occurred when he fed 5,000 people. And you just made the claim, even though he fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 4 fish, or whatever it may be, the people weren't convinced he was who he claimed to be.
I'm saying you are the one who claimed that people were convinced, right? I'm saying that the fact that he gave them, he made a miracle of the bread doesn't mean that they were convinced.
Very brief point?
Please, Imran,
the reason why.
Raphael, I just wanted to just go back to because the point that you made, which was interesting, was you believe that Jonah was dead in the belly of the whale.
Yes.
And to be honest, it's the first time I've heard anybody say that. I have to be very honest with you. I've never heard a Christian say that to me before. And what you said was that this is because the word Sheol is used. And your interesting discussion with you and Nazam about this. So whilst you were talking to Hamza, I was just reading through Jonah, and I think this is the NIV. I'm not sure the translation. So from BibleStudyTools.com website. So if you look, so I'm just reading through to see, because I'd never seen this interpretation that you were giving, and I think because it would seem like a reasonable thing to say that that somebody who's swallowed by a whale would die, and that's the assumption that people would make. And for most people, the miracle is that Jonah survived this thing that would normally kill him. That was being the miracle, apart from also being thrown into the stormy sea, which would have killed you, but you survived this thing as well. Then you're swallowed by the whale, that should have killed you, but you survived that as well. Then you spend 3 days and nights in the belly of this whale, that which should have killed you, but you survived that as well. Now, when I was reading through, let me just find the verse. So this is after the prayer happened. So let me go to it very quickly. Let me just try and find it up. I think this is in chapter 2.
Chapter 2, verse 1. Sorry, chapter 2, verse 1.
Sure.
Sorry, 2. Chapter 2, verse 2.
So in chapter 2, I'll start from 1 actually. So chapter 2, verse 1. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God, and he said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me from deep within the realm of the dead. I called for help, and you listened to my cry." So you're saying that this is from the realm of the dead.
Yes.
Now, and that's what you're saying. So you're saying literally this means hell, or whatever Sheol might refer to.
Yeah.
Now, if you go down further, if you read from verse 7. And it says, "When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you to your holy temple." So this demonstrates to you that when the prayer was being made by Jonah, he was not dead.
No, but it starts by saying...
that's a very good point.
He says, "When my life was ebbing away," obviously when your life is ebbing away, you're not dead at that point. "I remembered you, and my prayer rose to you to your holy temple." So this for me, when I'm reading this, and you can give me your explanation of why you think this is not the case.
Let's see.
So let me just
1 second, Rafael.
Sorry,
Let him finish, please.
So the point that I'm making is, it's clear from reading the very chapter that I've just read here that when Jonah was praying in the belly of the whale, his life was ebbing away, but he was not dead, and he was praying because he said, "I remembered you when my life was ebbing away, and my prayer rose to you to your holy temple." So this is demonstrative of the fact that being swallowed by the whale didn't kill him.
He was still alive.
He was still alive.
Yeah.
So I think that your interpretation
Sheol is in a
doesn't really fit with the
metaphorical
words
sense.
of Jonah.
Yeah.
So I want to point out, I'm reading from the NET here, and on page 1715 and page 1717, it provides some commentary on these two passages. Could I just read it briefly? So what Dr. Imran said is not only correct, and what Nazam agreed with is not only correct. Here's what it says directly about his mention of Sheol. It says, Jonah pictures himself in the belly of Sheol, its very center. In other words, he's as good as dead. That is a metaphor. And then for verse 7, it reads, "Fainting away from me," is used elsewhere to describe the onset of death, when a person's life begins to slip away, the loss of one's senses due to turmoil, and the loss of all hope surviving calamity. So it seems that all the commentaries seem to converge on the point. He is speaking metaphorically, and he's using the language as if he had died.
Okay, now listen to me now. So in Christianity, when you die, you have two different deaths. So you have your body who can die, and your soul getting out of your body and go to the realm of the dead. So what I am saying is that Jonah spiritually was in the realm of the dead, although his body was not totally gone. He was spiritually in the realm of the dead.
So
and
his body was alive?
No, the fainting away, that's what you're talking about.
No, is
right?
the body still alive? You said the body is not dead. Is that correct? The body is still alive.
I would say that I don't know where I read that in the Bible. So after 3 days,
Hold on. Are you saying he's still alive in the whale?
No, I'm saying his body could come back after his body could come back in terms of physically, right? Let's say when Jesus rose Lazarus, it was 4 days. So they were saying that after 4 days it was smelling. So so I'm saying that when Jonah was in the belly of the whale, his body was not smelling in a sense, but spiritually he was dead.
Does the text say that?
That's why I say when you say, okay, do you understand what I mean? I said after 3 days, normally we'll say that his body is actually gone, right?
Hold on.
In the case of Jesus Christ, no, let me finish. Let me finish. I will explain slowly. After 3 days, and this go to 4 days, and it's gonna be smelling, right? In the case of Lazarus, that's why the miracle was, in the case of Lazarus, was actually very important. But in the case of Jonah, that aspect didn't happen. But I'm saying spiritually he was dead, because his soul was in the realm of the dead. Do you understand? So I'm separating two things: the body who still can come back without any damage, and spiritually who being in the realm of the dead. Okay. And this happened to Jesus. Go ahead.
Right, Rafael, work with me here. Forget about Lazarus, right? We're focusing on what you yourself say. So you said to me that you would speak to me slowly as if I didn't understand. We understand what you're saying. And so it doesn't matter if you say it slowly or quickly, you're still wrong. But just work with me here. Let's go step by step. Does the text say at any point that Jonah died?
Yes, he was in the realm of the dead.
No. Does the text say that Jonah died?
The text doesn't say he died. It didn't say he was alive.
So it doesn't say he's alive, but we have to presume he's alive because it does not say he's died, correct?
But spiritually, that's why I separate body or spirit. His spirit was in the realm of the dead. His body was there.
Does Jonah make that separation like you do?
But this is okay. Jonah didn't make, but this is our belief in Christianity.
That's good. Hold on. So we've established, 1 second, we've established that Jonah does not say that he died, and he does not make the separation that you are making. So already on these 2 points, you've already said the text does not say what you say.
But the text doesn't say he was alive either.
But the text does say, it says his life was slipping away. It does not say I was spiritually dead, but my body could be okay. He doesn't say that.
Look at that. The spiritually, you died when you are in the realm of the dead. This is spiritually, okay? When you are in the realm of the dead, spiritually die. You can still come back.
Rafael, could I just make the point? So I just want to emphasize the thing. So your point you're making is that he says that he's from deep within the realm of the dead, I called for help. So this is the call for help that Jonah is making, and you're saying that because he says from deep within the realm of the dead, this means he was dead. Okay.
Yeah, it went spiritual in Sheol.
Sure. This is what you're saying. So to be honest with you, I don't understand your separation of the spiritually dead and the physically dead. And the reason for that is when the soul is removed from the body, essentially you're dead. Yeah.
Yeah, but your body can be how do you say that? Your body is not rotten, so your body can still come back. You can still come back to life, and that's what I want to try to understand, to tell you. Jesus, after 3 days, that's how Jesus came back to life without any major damage.
Raphael, we don't determine death by rotting of the bodies. You can die. You can be dead, and your body's not rotted yet.
I agree.
But let me just make the point. So it says, when in my distress, I called to the Lord, and you're saying that he says, and obviously he goes on to say, and he answered me, from deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. So this is he's saying that he called for help, and it was listened to, and from in the realm of the dead. Then in verse 7, this clarifies when this was happening. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, and my prayer rose to you to your holy temple. So that calling from the realm of the dead was when his life was ebbing away. So for me, he clearly says, I'm alive.
No, but
he actually makes the statement, when my life was ebbing away. So this means that you still have life.
I perfectly understand your point, but I have the impression that you don't want to accept my separation of body and soul. I'm saying his spirit is calling from the realm of the dead, which means he died. Okay, and this is what happened to Jesus also. Jesus was in the realm of the dead, right?
But,
and his body was dead, didn't decay.
Sorry, Rafa, to interrupt you.
And he came back.
Sure. Rafa, he says, when my life was ebbing away. Now, when your life is ebbing away, are you dead?
In the body?
No. It says, when my life was ebbing away.
Yeah, he was not
when
dead.
Your life is ebbing away, are you dead at that point?
At that point, he was not dead.
Okay. And that was
in your definition of death.
And this
in your
was
definition of
okay.
death.
So if you're changing the definition of death, then I don't really have an argument to make
No,
against you.
but
Because then what it means is that we're using a word that is common between us in a way that is strange.
I disagree. The definition of death is not the same in Christianity and in any other religion. We have at least.
So in Christianity, you have to be rotting before you can be said to be dead. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, in Christianity, you have the separation of the soul of the body is when that's death. Okay, when your soul separates from your body.
Ebbing, has your soul already separated?
What do you say again?
When your life is ebbing, has your soul at that point already separated from your body?
So it depends. As I say, in that case, since you have in the passage, you have two things. His life is talking about the life of his body.
I'm sorry.
He's stepping away, right? But I'm saying spiritually, that separation means that he was dead. Okay, because
Rafael, we really appreciate your contribution.
But just before Rafael goes,
because I don't really know what to make of that.
No, because that in itself,
it's enough, isn't it?
Anyway, I'm reading Mark and Matthew here, both of them, and both of them, the Pharisees come forth and began to question him, seeking a sign from heaven, basically seeking a miracle. And Jesus says, "Why does this generation seek after a sign? Very say there'll be no sign will be given." And then in Matthew says, "Sign of Jonah." Now we know Jesus did many miracles in front of the people. Healing the dead, raising the dead, healing the leper, healing the blind. So the idea that there would be no sign except the sign of Jonah is complete mockery if the other miracles are true. Or it could be that it was only the Pharisees that were supposed to see this particular sign, which again didn't happen because Jesus never appeared to them after a resurrection. Rafael, see you on the next stream. Latest, dude.
Well, thank you, Rafael. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rafael, for your time.
Could I just quote what another Christian has said about Raphael's points? Raphael, don't embarrass us anymore. You don't know history, no theology. The Muslims agree with you, my friends. I wanna point out, right? I just wanna put a question out there. God forbid, our friend Raphael is on his deathbed. And the doctor says, "Raphael, I can give you a medication that can make you live." Raphael turns to the doctor and says, "I'm already dead, doctor." Doctor turns to us, "Raphael, I can feel your heartbeat. My heart is already ebbing away. I'm dead already. Don't save me." Does he think about what he says? He's dead, even though he says he's not dead. He's trying to, what I think is, and I'm not going to beat him up because he's gone. He's trying to read his Christian theology into the text, but the text does not lend credence to his Christian theology. So he has to find a way to create this false dichotomy between spiritual death and bodily death. And he's projecting a future idea from what Christians believe in into the past upon Jonah himself. If Jonah himself did not use these ideas or these words or these terms to describe his quote-unquote death, then we can't change that for him, right?
And the problem with this interpretation is, like, if you go to the book of Hebrews says it's been ordained for all men once to die and then the resurrection. So if Jonah did die and then was resurrected from the dead, then where is Jonah now? He should still be amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously no Jew, Christian or Muslim believes that. And as I said, traditionally, Jews, Muslims and Christians have interpreted this story as Jonah surviving death, surviving from the world's belly. It's only because of this problem which has been highlighted to certain apologists. They bring up this point about Jonah did actually die and then was resurrected, but that apology doesn't work, unfortunately.
Well, what I find so funny is you guys are going about Jonah and the whale, and I'm like, but the Pharisees asked for a sign.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get over that interpretation. It was just a word. I've never heard that before from anyone.
Someone did point out that James White used a similar argument against Zakir Hussain.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
But so I think what has happened here is he's come in with that apologetic in mind.
Yeah.
But not being able to articulate that from the text itself.
When I think Gilchrist made the same.
John
and
Gilchrist?
I've heard this same response from other apologists as well. I'm at Speaker's Corner, and yeah.
It's a really bad argument, but I do want to point out he was trying to explain to a medical doctor what that is. Really, Raphael, come on. He's telling the doctor, you don't understand what that is. Dr. Imran is in the business of saving lives, spiritual, because he's here, and bodily.
Alhamdulillah. You know, I remember I worked for about 8 months on a cancer ward once when I was a young trainee doctor. And it was really, you know, death is one of those profound times when you're with an individual. And one of the most profound experiences for me actually was I was with a husband and wife who the husband had cancer metastatic all over the place. He was dying slowly, and the wife had never experienced this. And I had to really she didn't know what to do. She kept getting up when he was getting distressed. So I had to sit her down, hold his hand. And you know when this person's about to, because that time is coming, they're suffering, that their breath changes. And one of the things this man did to me very straight, he looked over my shoulder. So this is the dying man. His wife is sitting on one hand holding his hand. I'm sitting on the other side holding the hand to show her how to care for her dying husband. And he sort of looked over my shoulder and said, "Tell him I'm not ready." Wallahi, those words, and the hairs on the back of my head, in my neck, just stood up like this. And I thought, please let there be somebody there, like the nurse or someone else. And I turned and there was nobody there, subhanAllah. And, you know, when you see things like that, you definitely know that at that moment, your eyes are opened. You know, may Allah guide us all, inshallah, to the right.
Ameen. SubhanAllah.
And you know, this point you brought up, Dr. Imran, from chapter 2 of the book of Jonah, verse 7. I wasn't actually aware of this, so thank you for highlighting this. I knew the counter response is to basically say that the word Sheol is also used by David in Psalms in a metaphorical sense. So even if Jonah does use it, it can still be understood in a non-literal way. But yeah, as you said, in verse 7 makes it clear that he is using it it's a figure of speech.
You're absolutely right. And there's another example of the Sheol being used metaphorically. I think it's someone, I can't remember where it is, who says, "I die daily." And they use I can't remember whose that verse is attributed to in the New Testament, but it's there. And this is another example that suffering is often thought of as death. Yeah. So absolutely, I think both arguments are valid. But my life was ebbing away, and I remembered you. This is not a dead person saying that.
Yeah, it looks like it's Paul. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 31.
Okay.
Paul says, "I die daily." So yeah, obviously there he's using it in a figurative sense. And also I mentioned Hebrews chapter 11. I think it's verse 9 or 19, where it describes Isaac as dying and resurrecting, even though even Raphael doesn't believe that Isaac literally died and rose from the dead.
Who asked for a sign?
Everyone.
The Pharisees. But depends on which gospel you read, because in Mark and Matthew it's the gospel. Yeah. In Mark and Matthew it's the Pharisees, and in Luke it's the people. So
the reference in Luke for the sign of Jonah is Luke chapter 11, and the reference for Mark is Mark chapter 8, and Matthew is Matthew chapter 12.
Yeah.
In case people want to look these verses up.
If I was a gambling man, I would roll with the Gospel of Mark, where it says no sign will be given to these Pharisees, and no sign was given to them. Ta-da! No need for 3 days, 3 night nonsense, which Matthew spouts on about.
Although the Quran does say that Jesus came to them with signs, such as, raising people from the dead by God's permission, as well as healing the deaf and the blind, and informing them as to what they need to store in their house. Yeah,
I think the difference comes, though, when they demand a sign. So they want to be like a performing seal. Yeah, do this for us. Show us this, show us that. Where Jesus was doing his thing, no problem. But asking for demanding a sign means that this was going to be a specific sign that you've asked me for, that I'm going to do for you. Yeah? Whereas the other signs, feeding the 5,000, no one asked him to do that. Healing the leper, no one asked him really to do that. Or as a sign of anything. He just did it according to the Gospels. But this particular situation, It was, come on, performing seal, prove who you are. And then Jesus said, I'm not going to give you no sign. Do you get me?
Yeah, and also Mark may have his own motives as well, and he's not necessarily being historical as well. Mark may be using this kind of messianic secret to try to explain why, generally it wasn't accepted that Jesus was the Messiah, and so Mark has it because Jesus didn't publicly declare his identity as the Messiah and didn't give them any signs.
No, but he just fed 5,000 people with 4 loaves of bread.
Yeah.
That's a pretty bad way to keep a secret.
Yeah, not the greatest way.
Sure.
Okay, who's the final guest?
So we've got one person waiting, but I think he's got a Muslim name. Should we bring him on to find out?
First Colossians?
No, that's not a
he's
Muslim
left.
name.
Okay.
All right, should we bring him on? See what happens.
Well, we'll see how long it lasts, isn't it?
Hello, welcome to the stream.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Walaikum salam.
It's meant to be Christians, bro. What are you doing?
No, I'm not Christian, but alhamdulillah.
Whoa, but it's meant to be Christians, bro. You're taking their limelight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, since you have Ijaz in here, no Christian scholar will come on.
Well, thanks for coming on anyway, but yeah, it's not fair to have Muslim brothers on when there might be Christians.
Okay, bro. I just wanted to say hi. So anyway,
thank you, bro.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Have a good day, inshallah.
Allah bless you.
Does Dr. Imran or Nazam want to offer us a summary so we can close up shop to this week's introductory episode to Luke?
Doctor's the one, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to. So.
Your mic's muted, Doctor.
Is there anything that you wanted to add or say before I do that at all?
Just if I may say anything at all, I was actually impressed with Frank coming back and
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
His line of argumentation was definitely better. A little bit off topic, I'll grant you that, but generally he was a bit more receptive and he was willing to at least go in depth and read the text with us and come to an amicable conclusion, and that's what we look for. I was particularly happy that I'm looking, because I often look at the comments. When you see me looking down, I'm looking at the comments. The people got the points. And I realized, even though we didn't have as many points as we had for the introduction to Mark and the introduction to Matthew, even the few points we mentioned for Luke was sufficient. Alhamdulillah. And it's not that we can't go into more detail, but the problem is when we do go into more detail, sometimes our Christian colleagues get lost between the many points. So I think the simpler approach definitely worked to our advantage this week. That's generally it. Anyone else?
I think they've got a week now to digest this stream. So Christians, when you're watching this video, watch the video, pay attention to the points that are being made. So when you come on next week, have it written down in front of you. Hamza said this, Ijaz said this, Nazam said this, the doctor said this, and this is why they're wrong, and then correct us. That's the whole point.
Wait a second. A point just occurred to me. Isn't the argument that the woman went to the tomb of Jesus to apply the word spices? Do I have it wrong?
Oil?
Yeah, spices.
Right.
Yeah,
because the body would smell after 3 days. So
no, I think it was to anoint the body.
Yeah.
So he was anointed before that. He was anointed before with the expensive thing. I've seen some Christians argue that they went to apply that on him to remove the smell from his body. But then it just occurred to me, Raphael refuted that by saying, the body doesn't die within that time. It's perfectly fine. It's only after that it begins to rot. So then the apologetics narrative contradicts what Raphael was trying to say. So thank you, Raphael. Job done.
Not to start something new again, it's Mark chapter 16, verse 1. It says that the women bought spices to anoint the body of Jesus.
But he's anointed before that as well, but the expensive anointment.
That's right. Yeah.
You don't anoint a body twice, just once, I think.
So, but it's interesting in that part of the crucifixion narrative, they bring 100 weight of these spices, aloe and myrrh, which are interestingly antibiotic, anti-inflammatory properties, and that's about 40 or 50 kilos worth. So
Really?
you'd need a truck to, or a cart to bring this. Really, you couldn't do it by hand. But anyway, that's another thing. We'll probably get into another point. So just to summarize, brother. So this is our first topic on Luke this time that we've done. We'll do another one, giving the Christian brothers and sisters
Rafael, this doesn't say anything.
time to digest.
I just wanted to pop it on.
Okay, that's fine. Just
Can
give
I
me your
just-
comment.
Can I just quickly ask the viewers that if you're a Muslim, please don't click on the link and come on, because my management becomes really hard. You get lots of a Muslim coming on. It's hard to find out who's who and who's actually going to come on to talk about as a Christian. So if you are a Muslim and in the back waiting, please just log yourself off. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ben, I gotta tell you, when you said management gets hard, I'm like, does he referring to Hamza, or is he meant the management of the
Of the whole thing. So I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and it makes things difficult. Thank you for doing that, guys.
Do we have any non-Muslim guests still? Or?
Unfortunately not. So we did have a few, but they've gone. They keep coming on and off and on and off.
I think they.
So can I just invite you, the Christians, to come on? It'll be awesome. I'll pop the
So I
link
think
on
it's
as
really
well.
important, because what we're trying to do here is raise the points about the historicity of the Bible that go against the claims that it's historical and from eyewitnesses. And we really want Christian brothers and sisters to come and talk to us, because they're the ones who make these claims to us. And it's unfair to be talking about a biblical topic without a Christian interacting with us in some way, which is why we'd prefer the people who come into the back room to have a discussion with us be from the Christian religion. So please, brothers and sisters, adhere to that rule. Jazakallah khair. It seems like there's no one else to come on, so I'm just going to do a very quick summary, if that's okay. We're at 2 hours and 6 minutes, inshallah.
Yeah, it's 2 hours, mashallah.
So we started off talking about the early manuscripts for, or the early papyri for Luke, and they were from the 2nd or the 3rd century up to the 4th century. So we were saying that they was very late. And then we looked, and then we also went into specifically talking about the verses within Luke. So we started talking about Luke 1, where many undertook to write accounts of the things that were being fulfilled amongst us, just as they were handed down by those who were eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. So this is talking about many, many gospels potentially that have been written, and the term "many" doesn't apply to two; it would apply to multiple gospels that would have been there. And this is something that Luke, whoever this person is, has decided to write an orderly account of for somebody, a colleague called Theophilus. Now, what this really points to is actually this is not someone who's either an eyewitness, because we know that Luke wasn't one of the disciples, and it points to someone who was gathering information that was available at the time to try and bring a narrative. So maybe from things that people said, and he's trying to build a cohesive narrative. We know that actually he does use many sources. He does refer to Mark a lot, but changes some of the things from there. And also for Matthew, there are differences between these two narrations of the same events. So one of the big things that was pointed out was the difference between the use of Herod and the slaying of the babies, and the time frame when Herod was in power by Matthew, and the Quirinius and the census that was used by Luke, and the much later timing of that, a 10-decade difference for when Jesus would have been born potentially, and the reasons around them. Now, there is no extra biblical evidence for the Herod killings at all. We've spoken about this at length, and there are some writings that suggest that when Quirinius happened, so we can verify that was about 10 years later, and again, there's no signs of the census ever happening anywhere. So there are two ahistorical events with two different people who were in power happening to try and bring Jesus into the area where they need him to be at the time, and which was sort of problematic. Interesting comment by brother Nazam was talking about how the first couple of chapters of Luke would have possibly been added later on by another hand, and that was fascinating as well. And then brother Ijaz mentioned about the Roman physician who wrote in a way that was almost like a template for which Luke would have used to try and write his information down. Then Brother Hamza mentioned the Sign of Jonah, which became the main topic of discussion from that point onwards, really. We had a couple of people who came in to try and sort of speak about things. So that we initially had Frank, who really his point of view of coming on and talking was really that from a theological sense, it says it in the Quran. It matches what's in that passage that's in the Quran matches the statements made by Luke. Therefore, how can you deny this? And we were trying to talk about a historical perspective, and we tried to get him to understand the difference between what Matthew, Mark, and Luke were saying. He didn't really accept contradictions or even the definition of contradictions. So although it was a good conversation, I think it was quite productive. He'll be useful to have that discussion about sort of the Quran when we do the stream on that, inshallah. And then we had Rafael, who brought an amazing account of Jonah saying that he didn't die. Never really heard this anywhere before. And when we analysed this, he was basing it on a word and then Christian theology about how people die. Well, I don't know if it's Christian theology, because actually it seems to be his personal theology on the different types of death that a person could undergo. And we clearly showed from in Jonah chapter 2, verse 7, that Jonah was alive when he was making his prayer to God, which was then heard. So that's really an overall summary of everything that's happened. And really the point here I was saying to our Christian brothers and sisters is show us why we should consider Luke here. We're talking about historical. And what we've demonstrated is a few reasons why. And we would love for you to go through, look at the stream, analyze what we're saying, and then come back to us and say, actually, we think historically you're wrong on these points. So we look forward to that stream, that interaction in our next stream next week.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
All right. Thanks for watching, guys.
Welcome, brothers and sisters. Peace to everyone else.
Assalamu alaikum. To everyone.